And from then on, it got, as you know and others know, that it became a little bit more complicated than that, because in May, McNamara died. And then the question was, who would Governor Romney appoint? And naturally, I wanted the appointment, and I had a lot of support for it. But nevertheless, it wasn't a sure thing.
The actual choice by Romney occurred when you were in Saigon, as I recall.
That's correct. I was over there on with the House Operations Committee doing some investigating of the use of defense funds. It happened that I was with a fellow named Bo Calloway of Colorado and Don Rumsfeld of Illinois.
Both of whom served in presidential cabinets at one time or another after that.
That's exactly right. Incidentally, Don Rumsfeld's career in Congress started out on my House staff before he became a congressman. And since then, of course, he's been Secretary of Defense and a lot of things. But yes, I got a call from George Romney in Saigon, and we had a little champagne after that.
Going back just a moment, Governor Romney filling that Senate vacancy, was it your impression that he hesitated or that he had something else in mind?
Well, I'm sure he was getting a lot of advice from different people. There were those who really thought that I would be a drag on his ticket because of the Land of Griffin bill and the labor opposition that would come forth. And I don't know exactly, but there were others that were very capable and would have been good candidates that were being considered.
After your appointment in May 1966, you were immediately facing a full-blown Senate campaign, and of course in that primary was Soapy Williams, the grand champion vote-getter, and Mayor Jerry Cavanaugh of Detroit. How did you view your prospects for winning in the fall?
Well, they were rather frightening to think that I was going to be up against the real champ of Michigan, and somebody who was really loved and respected throughout the state.
Got elected 6 times as governor?
Absolutely. And so, of course, I was pulling for Jerry Cavanaugh. I remember one of the things we did when the primary election night, when Cavanaugh lost, we made a point to go over to the Cavanaugh headquarters and console with them and his supporters, and hoping that maybe some of them would come and support us. And I think some of them did.
What were some of the turning points in that campaign with Soapy Williams that fall?
Well, you know, George Romney wasn't somebody who stayed on the sidelines. He was ready to get out and fight. And I remember Lyndon Johnson coming into Michigan to campaign for Zoltan Ferenczi and Soapy. And to everybody's surprise, George Romney and I were at the airport at the bottom of the stairway waiting for the president to come in, the governor and the senators. They couldn't really push us aside.
Sure.
And as I recall, Lyndon Johnson put us in his limousine and took us down to Cobo Hall, where he proceeded to give a speech and mispronounce Ferenczi's name.
Not very good for the Democratic candidate for governor.
Yeah. And speaking of Ferenczi, you know, he was a great guy, and unfortunately the Democrats were sometimes put in the hole because of Zoltan's humor. He said something about Jim Hare had only one decision to make every year, and that was to choose the color of the license plates, and wouldn't he know he goosed that. And then, but to everybody's astonishment, you know, he said something about Soapy Williams, that nothing new had come out of Soapy for years except 3 gallstones. And I had a lot of fun with that as I would go around giving my speeches. You know, I would say, well, now, I would never say anything like this, but have you heard what Zoltan said about Soapy Williams? And with friends like that, you know, Soapy doesn't need any enemies. I'm sure that that's not true, you know.
And there was some feeling among the electorate that fall that Soapy maybe was a little past his prime, and so what Zoltan said really played beautifully into your camp.
Well, we in those days, as I've said, you know, you didn't go negative. You certainly wouldn't go negative against Soapy Williams, but in a subtle way, we tried to make the point with our slogan of our campaign. It was on the billboards: youth and experience. Just saying, you know, that
Right.
there we are.
Right, right, right.
And that seemed to catch on.
And that election was won by you by nearly 300,000 votes, and it turned out to be a great Republican year. George Romney won big. Once again, as in 1956, Republicans elected a number of new young congressmen.
Yeah.
And
I want to say something else. You know, Romney put together what he called the action team, which was Romney, Milliken, and Griffin. And we didn't write off the black vote in Detroit. We went in and had neighborhood headquarters all through Detroit. We didn't write off the union vote. We made every effort we climbed over fences in Flint to go to picnics and things of that kind, which the press took note of, you know, going in to reach out and try to get the labor vote. And I'm sure we got a lot more of it than Republicans ordinarily would get.
in the spring of 1968, President Johnson surprised a lot of people by announcing that he would not run for re-election. You suddenly achieved a great measure of national fame by plunging into a controversy over his choice for a Supreme Court Chief Justice. What can you tell us about that?
When I was flying back to Washington from Detroit one time, I picked up the Wall Street Journal, and it had a little note. It said, the rumor is in Washington that Earl Warren is about to resign so that he will have something to say about the choice of his successor. And I read that and it bothered me very much. Of course, you will remember that there was a lot of dissension between Earl Warren and Richard Nixon back in California. And Eisenhower selected Nixon over Warren for vice president, but then of course gave Warren the spot on the Supreme Court. I went to my office that day and had my staff begin to write a speech saying that this rumor can't be true. Surely Earl Warren wouldn't do that. You know, this is political. And he doesn't have anything to say about who's going to be his successor, or he shouldn't have. This is the business of the President and the Senate. Well, first thing you know, before I could even give the speech, Earl Warren's resignation was announced. And it was a very strange and interesting announcement, the exchange of correspondence between Warren and Johnson. Warren said, "I wish to resign at the pleasure of the President." The President wrote back and said, "I'll accept your resignation when your successor is qualified." That meant there was no vacancy, and that it said in a way to the Senate, you either accept our nominee or you're going to continue to have Warren indefinitely. Well, you have to kind of remember that back in those days, the Warren court was not in high repute as far as the American people were concerned. There were polls that over 60% of the people considered it unfavorably. There was lots of reaction, of course, to such things as the decisions on the church-state, the extension and application of the exclusionary rule as it applied to criminals. There was the whole problem of busing in schools and things like that. Just made the whole business of the Supreme Court very controversial. And my reaction was immediately that here in the summer, just before the election, when the people are about to vote, we shouldn't be allowing Johnson, a lame duck, to select the next Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I gave a speech to that effect. I never thought anybody would pay any attention to it. But of course, it did develop into quite a crusade.